Today, I'm going to tell you a story so quiet, so haunting, it crept under my skin and refused to let go. Set deep in the frozen American West, where snow buries hope and silence can be deadlier than any gun. This is a land where storms don't just test the body, they strip the soul bare, and where one choice can tie two lives together forever. It all began with a sound in the snow. Barely audible, easy to ignore, yet powerful enough to change the fate of two people who were never meant to meet. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The winter of 1867 crushed northern New Mexico beneath its iron grip, smothering the high country under walls of snow and turning the land silent, merciless, and white. Mara Elling stood at the frost-clouded window of her cabin, watching the storm batter the glass as if the mountains themselves were trying to claw their way inside. 6 months. 6 months since Cole Elling had been laid beneath frozen soil. 6 months since pneumonia had taken him and left her alone in a land that did not care whether a woman lived or died. Her breath fogged the pain as she rested her brow against the icy glass. The cabin felt far too large now, hollow, echoing, unforgiving. Every wall carried memories of the man who had promised her freedom out west and delivered solitude instead. Boston felt unreal now, a distant place of tight rooms and tighter expectations, where her uncle once tried to trade her future like currency to the highest bidder. She had run toward love, toward Cole, toward the hope of a life chosen freely. But love, she had learned, could perish just as easily as men did. "You're stronger than you know, Mara." Cole's voice echoed in her memory, hoarse, fading, his rough hand gripping hers on his final night. "Promise me you'll survive. Promise me you won't let this land break you." She had promised, and she had kept it, through blistered hands splitting firewood, through hunting rabbits with Cole's old rifle, through waking each dawn and choosing endurance over despair. But this winter, this brutal, relentless winter, tested that promise with every breath she took. The wind screamed along the walls, shaking the shutters like an angry beast. Mara turned away from the window and drew her thin shawl tighter around herself. The fire burned low, chewing through the last of yesterday's wood. She would need more before night fell, though the thought of stepping back into that white fury made her joints ache with dread. She was shrugging into Cole's oversized coat, still carrying the faint trace of him, when she heard it. A sound that did not belong to the storm. Low, ragged, alive. Mara froze, one hand hovering halfway to the rifle mounted above the door. Then another sound. Closer this time. Suffering. Real. Every sensible instinct screamed at her to lock the door, to stay hidden, to live. But her hands moved anyway, hands trained by loss and necessity. She had nursed Cole through his last days, delivered calves, mended broken wings. The urge to save ran deeper than fear. The cold struck her like a hammer when she stepped outside. Snow tore across her face, stealing her breath. She pushed forward, squinting into the white void, following the sound toward the tree line where the forest pressed tight against her clearing. That was when she saw him. A man lay twisted in the snow no more than 20 yards from her door. Dark hair spilled across the white like ink. Even from a distance, she could see the wrongness of his stillness, the blue creeping into exposed skin. He wore buckskin, heavy with ice, marked by intricate beadwork stiffened by frost. Apache. The word lodged in her throat, colder than the wind. Every warning she had ever heard rang in her skull. Never trust one. They'll kill you without hesitation. Savages. Monsters. But as she stood there, rifle trembling in her grip, she saw only a man dying in the snow. A human being abandoned to the cold. Mercy. She whispered the word to the storm, unsure whether it was a prayer or a curse, and moved before fear could stop her. Snow swallowed her legs as she forced her way forward. Up close, the damage was undeniable. His lips were blue, his breathing shallow and uneven. A deep gash split his temple, blood frozen dark against his skin. His eyes were closed. Even unconscious, he radiated something dangerous, tall, broad-shouldered, scarred like a seasoned fighter. This was no ordinary man. Everything about him spoke of strength, of violence, of survival balanced on a blade's edge. "Turn back," reason urged. "Leave him," but Mara was already checking his pulse. There, faint, stubborn, refusing to yield. She thought of Cole, of his last words, of the vow she had made. Strength came in many forms. Sometimes it meant standing your ground. Sometimes it meant reaching into the storm. "Lord, help me," she muttered, bracing her shoulder beneath his arm. "This'll get us both killed." He was impossibly heavy, dead weight dragging her towards the snow. But 6 months of hauling water and chopping wood had carved hard strength into her bones. Inch by agonizing inch, she hauled him toward the cabin. Her lungs burned, her muscles screamed. By the time she dragged him inside, her legs gave out and she collapsed, sobbing, as his body hit the floor in a heap of melting snow, motionless as death. Mara slammed the door shut and leaned against it, heart pounding so violently she thought it might tear free. "What have I done?" There was no time to wonder. A man was dying on her floor. She could question her judgment later. At this moment, a man was dying on the floor of her cabin. Mara Elling moved with the sharp focus of desperation, tearing away his frozen buckskin garments while her fingers trembled and barely obeyed her will. His skin burned with cold beneath her touch, his body heat nearly gone. She knew the signs well. She had watched neighbors fade from hypothermia, had nearly frozen herself during past winters. Mara dragged every blanket she owned from the bed and wrapped him tightly in layers of wool and cotton. She stoked the hearth until the flames roared, filling the cabin with hard-won warmth. Then, knowing what had to be done and hating it all the same, she peeled off her damp clothing and slid beneath the blankets beside him. The shock of his frozen skin tore a gasp from her lungs. Still, she pressed close, forcing her own heat into his rigid body. "This is medicine," she told herself, "nothing more." The way she could feel every line of muscle beneath his skin meant nothing. The fact that even half dead, he carried a raw, untamed strength that stole her breath meant nothing at all. "Don't you dare die," she whispered fiercely against his shoulder. "I didn't drag your impossible weight through a blizzard just to watch you quit. Don't you dare!" He answered only with shallow, rasping breaths. Mara held him through the long night, feeding the fire, shifting his body to prevent pressure sores, tipping water between his cracked lips. Near midnight, fever seized him. He thrashed and muttered in a language she didn't know, fighting enemies only he could see. She cooled his burning skin with damp cloths, restrained him gently when nightmares pulled him toward invisible battles. By firelight, she studied his face for the first time. He was younger than she had thought. No more than 30. Sharp cheekbones, a powerful jaw, a nose broken once and healed crooked. His dark hair, now dry, spilled past his shoulders in a straight, heavy fall. Even weakened, his features held a fierce beauty that tightened something deep in her chest. "Who are you?" she wondered, tracing the edge of a scar near his collarbone. "What road led you here?" Outside, the storm howled for 3 days and 3 nights. Mara rarely left his side, drifting in a strange half-world between sleep and waking, past and present. She spoke to him in the silence, filling the cabin with stories. About Boston, about Cole Elling, about the loneliness that had become her shadow. "I ran from a marriage," she admitted on the second night, her voice barely louder than the fire. "My uncle tried to marry me off to a banker. Old, cruel, hands like dead fish. I was expected to smile, be grateful, and give him my life like a signed deed." She let out a bitter laugh and adjusted the blankets around his shoulders. "So I ran, took money from my uncle's safe, bought a train ticket west and never looked back. Cole found me in Santa Fe, said I was the bravest woman he'd ever met." She rested her palm on the man's burning brow. "He promised me freedom, choice, and he kept that promise until the day he died." The man stirred, murmuring softly through fever. Mara felt his skin, still hot but cooling. The fever was breaking. "I chose to save you," she whispered. "And I don't know if that makes me brave or foolish. Probably both. Cole would have said I was crazy. Every settler around here would call me a traitor." She leaned back against the wall, exhaustion dragging at her bones. "But I didn't come west to let fear decide my life. I came here to be free. And freedom means living by my own rules, even when they're reckless." Her eyes drifted closed. "So you'd better wake up," she murmured. "Because if you die after all this, I'll be extremely angry." She did not see his eyes open in the dark, did not see his gaze settle on her face, sharp and searching, did not see recognition flicker before sleep pulled him under once more. If she had, she would have seen something that would change everything, the look of a man who had just found something he hadn't known he was missing. On the fourth morning, Mara Elling woke to find him watching her. His eyes were open, dark, deep, unreadable, like mountain lakes sealed beneath winter ice. They followed her smallest movements as she sat up, brushed hair from her face, and reached instinctively to pull the blanket back over his shoulder. "You're awake," she breathed, relief flooding her voice. Then, carefully, "Do you understand English?" For a long moment he only watched her. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You're in my home," Mara said softly, steadying herself. "You were freezing to death outside. I brought you in. You've been unconscious for 3 days. Something stirred in his gaze. Surprise, calculation, something harder to read. His eyes moved through the cabin with quick, practiced precision, cataloging every shadow, every corner, every possible danger. When his gaze returned to Mara Elling, there was a new gravity in it, an intensity that raised the fine hairs along her arms. "Water?" she offered, lifting the tin cup from beside the bed. He took it with a brief dip of his head and drank deeply. She watched the slow movement of his throat as he swallowed, the way firelight carved sharp lines across his face. When he returned the cup, he gave another small nod. It was a gesture that carried thanks, but also authority, the manner of a man accustomed to giving orders, not receiving care. "I am Rauk," he said at last. His voice was rough, scraped raw by illness, yet steady. His English carried an accent, but was precise, deliberate. "War chief of the Jicarilla. These mountains and valleys answer to me." Mara's breath caught. She had heard that name before, spoken in low voices at the trading post, muttered by passing soldiers like a curse. Rauk, the Apache leader who moved like smoke through the territory. They said he struck without warning and vanished without trace. They said he was ruthless, relentless, as merciless as the land itself. They said his word was law among his people, and she had dragged him into her cabin like a lost dog. "Oh," she said faintly. "Well, that's unfortunate." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You knew what I was when you found me." It wasn't a question. Mara lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with more courage than she felt. "I knew you were dying. That was enough." "Why?" The single word carried real curiosity. She answered before she could stop herself, exhaustion stripping away caution. "Because I couldn't walk away. Because I've spent 6 months alone in these mountains, and I'm tired of death. Because sometimes the only way to stay human is to act like one, even when it's foolish." Rauk studied her in silence. His dark eyes seemed to see far deeper than flesh, into places she kept guarded even from herself. When he spoke again, his tone held absolute certainty. "Among my people, a life debt is sacred." He held her gaze. "You pulled me from death. By Jicarilla law, I owe you protection. My strength is your shield. My life stands guard over yours." Mara's heart lurched. "That isn't necessary. I didn't save you for payment." "It is done," he said flatly. No argument lived in his voice. "You are under my protection now. You belong to me." The words settled heavily between them. Mara opened her mouth. To argue, to protest, to explain that she had not fled one form of ownership to accept another. But his expression stopped her. This was not the look of a man claiming property. It was the look of a man accepting responsibility, a burden he would carry without complaint. Honor lived in that gaze, and something else, something that sent heat through her skin unrelated to the fire. "I don't belong to anyone," she said quietly but firmly. "Not you. Not any man. I came here to be free." For the first time, something like respect flickered across Rauk's face. "Then you will be free," he replied simply, "under my protection." It wasn't the answer she wanted, but as the storm screamed beyond the walls and the fire wrapped them in shared warmth, Mara realized she might have stepped into something more dangerous than the blizzard itself. She had saved a man who never forgot a debt, a man whose presence filled her small cabin with a wild, restless energy that made her pulse race. A man who looked at her as if she were something rare, something worth defending. As Rauk's eyes finally closed again, his body surrendering to the rest it needed to heal, Mara sat watching him, wondering what would happen when the snow finally melted, wondering whether when spring came and the world opened again, she would want him to leave at all. Outside, the wind sang its ancient song. Inside, by the fire's glow, something fragile and dangerous began to take root. Something that felt impossibly like the beginning of everything. The days that followed passed in a strange suspension, as if time itself had slowed. The world beyond the frost-coated windows ceased to exist. There was only the cabin, and its two unlikely occupants. The blizzard refused to break, sealing them together in isolation that felt both suffocating and strangely intimate. Rauk healed faster than Mara expected. By the second day awake, he could sit upright. By the third, he moved through the cabin with the smooth, deliberate grace of a predator, though she noticed how he favored his left side, where deep bruising darkened his ribs. He had been in a fight before the cold found him. He offered no explanation, and she did not ask. They learned a careful rhythm, neither too close nor too distant, navigating the uneasy ground between strangers who should have been enemies. Mara cooked simple meals over the fire. Cornmeal, beans, the last precious strips of dried venison. Rauk accepted the food with those quiet nods of his, eating efficiently, as if always prepared to flee or fight. He watched her often, not with menace, but with an intensity that made her acutely aware of every movement. She would catch his gaze as she stitched by firelight, as she brushed out her hair, and feel the air between them tighten, charged with something neither of them yet named. Her copper hair caught the firelight as she moved through the cramped cabin, tending to the small, ordinary rituals of survival that filled each day. Rauch's attention followed her with a weight she could almost feel. His gaze lingered, warm, deliberate, and it sent an awareness across her skin she tried hard to ignore. On the 5th morning, she woke to find him standing at her narrow workbench, studying Cole Elling's tools with careful focus. He lifted a broken axe handle, one dark brow arching in silent inquiry. "It snapped last week," Mara Elling said, pulling a blanket tighter around her shoulders against the morning chill. "I've been making do with the hatchet, but it's barely enough to split kindling." Without replying, Rauch crossed to the stack of spare wood Cole had stored near the wall. He selected a piece with practiced confidence, running his fingers along the grain, testing its strength. Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he drew a knife she hadn't realized he still carried and began to carve. Mara watched, transfixed, as the wood transformed beneath his hands. He worked with absolute focus, each motion smooth, precise, thin curls of wood falling like snow at his feet. There was a quiet calm to the way he carved, something centered and controlled that clashed with everything she had heard about him as a feared warrior. "You don't have to do that," she said softly. His eyes lifted to hers, dark and unreadable. "You saved my life. I will not sit while you struggle. I'm doing just fine." The corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but close. "Your woodpile disagrees." Despite herself, Mara felt her lips twitch. "Are you criticizing my chopping?" "I am stating facts." He returned to the handle, though she caught a flicker of something like humor in his eyes. "You are stubborn and proud. These are admirable traits. They do not split wood efficiently." "I am not stubborn," Mara protested, then stopped. "Well, maybe a little." "A little," Rauch agreed solemnly. His eyes betrayed him. "Like the mountains are a little tall." She laughed, an actual laugh, sudden and bright in the quiet cabin. The sound startled them both. When had she last laughed like that? Months ago, before Cole died. The laughter felt unfamiliar, almost rusty. But it felt good. Too good. Rauch's hands stilled. He looked at her again, but differently now. Softer. Curious. "What?" she asked, suddenly aware of herself. "You have courage," he said quietly. "But you carry deep sorrow. I see it even when you smile." The words struck too close. Mara turned away, poking at the fire to hide her reaction. "My husband died 6 months ago," she said after a moment. "Pneumonia. It took him fast. Living without him hasn't been easy." Silence stretched between them. "You loved him," Rauch said. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Yes, he was kind, gentle. He saw me as more than someone to be managed. When I ran from Boston, he was the first person who asked what I wanted." "And what did you want?" Mara froze, staring into the flames, poker unmoving in her hand. "Freedom," she said at last. "Choice, the right to live by my own rules." Cole understood that. He never tried to cage me. She heard Rauch move behind her, the soft sound of bare feet on wood. When she turned, he was close, not threatening, just near enough that she could see the shifting emotions in his eyes. "Among my people," he said slowly, "women are not property. They choose their husbands. They own their homes. They speak in council, and their voices carry weight." His gaze held hers. "Your freedom is not something I would take from you, Mara Elling. It is something I would defend with my life." Hearing her name from his lips sent a shiver through her, one that had nothing to do with cold. It was the first time he had spoken it, the first time she felt truly seen as more than the woman who saved him. "Why?" she whispered. "Why does it matter to you?" Rauch was silent for a long moment, searching her face. Because you are like the hawk, he said finally. Beautiful. Fierce. To cage such a creature would be to destroy what makes it powerful. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning she wasn't ready to unravel. Her heart hammered, heat rushing to her cheeks despite the winter pressing against the cabin walls. I should check the wood supply, she said, grasping for distance. She faltered, stepping back, needing space from the weight of his presence. Rauch allowed her retreat, yet she felt his gaze follow her as she pulled on Cole Elling's coat and pushed into the snow. The cold struck her hard, sharp as a slap, clearing her thoughts and forcing breath back into her lungs. What is happening to me? She had loved Cole, still loved him in a way. Her grief was real, heavy, but what stirred between her and the Apache warrior felt different. Dangerous, like standing at the edge of a sheer drop, terrified by the depth, yet drawn toward it all the same. When she returned with an armful of wood, Rauch had finished the axe handle. It was flawless, smooth, balanced perfectly in her hand. He had carved a small pattern into the grip, angular shapes that echoed the beadwork on his buckskin. It's perfect, Mara Elling whispered, brushing her fingers along the polished wood. It will serve you, Rauch replied simply. Then, with his usual blunt honesty, he added, You should not face another winter alone. This place is too remote, too dangerous. Mara stiffened. I've managed. You have survived, he corrected. That is not the same as living. The words cut because they rang true. She had been enduring, not living, moving through days wrapped in grief like a burial cloth. And what would you have me do? She asked sharply. Abandon the home Cole and I built? Crawl back to civilization and beg for scraps? No, Rauch said firmly. You should never beg. He stepped closer, and she found herself unable to move, caught in the intensity of his gaze. But you should not be alone. It is not right. And what do you suggest? The question came out sharper than she meant, tangled with fear and the dangerous warmth spreading through her chest. Rauch lifted his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His knuckles brushed her cheek, so gentle it stole her breath. His skin was warm now, no trace of the frozen man she had dragged from the snow. I would suggest, he said quietly, his thumb tracing her cheekbone, that when the snow melts and I return to my people, you come with me. Mara's eyes widened. What? You would be safe, honored. My people would protect the woman who saved their chief. You would have more freedom than any white settlement would grant you. I can't, she said quickly. I'm not Apache. I don't speak the language. I don't know the ways. You would learn. His hand fell, but his eyes held hers. And I would make certain you never face another winter alone, that the loneliness I see in you does not follow you. It was too much, too sudden. Mara backed away, shaking her head. You don't know me. I know you risked your life for a stranger, Rauch replied. I know you are stronger than you believe. I know you laugh like summer rain and stand against hardship like winter wind. His voice softened. In 3 days, you have made me feel more alive than years of blood and war. The words left her stunned. She stared at him, this impossible man who had fallen into her life on snow and storm, and felt something crack inside her. Something she had sealed shut the day they lowered Cole into frozen ground. I can't, she whispered, though even she heard the untruth in it. Rauch inclined his head, accepting her refusal even as he saw through it. Then I will stay until the snow melts. When I leave, you will choose with clear eyes. The days that followed shifted into something unnamed, yet undeniable. Something growing, like green shoots pushing through late snow. Rauch taught her how to read weather in the flight of birds, how to find water beneath ice, how to move soundlessly through timber. In return, Mara taught him English words, showed him how to bake bread from her dwindling flour, read aloud from the few books she had carried west from Boston. They settled into rhythm, partnership born of necessity, deepening into something else. He split wood while she mended. She cooked while he fed the fire. Evenings passed in shared silence that felt more intimate than speech. One night, as a new storm battered the shutters, Mara woke to find Rauch seated by the window, his dark outline framed by frost. She rose quietly, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and sat beside him. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. "I was dreaming," he said, "of blood, of fire, of battles without end." She understood nightmares. She had enough of her own. Without thinking, she reached for his hand, the same hand that carved her axe handle, that had touched her face with such care. His fingers closed around hers, steady and warm. She stayed. And so did he. In quiet, measured words, Rauch spoke of the wars that had shaped his life. He told her of a childhood spent watching his village burn, of rising among his people through skill and hard necessity, of becoming chief at 25 when the leader before him fell in battle. He spoke of the crushing weight of guarding his people against encroaching settlers, of choices that scarred his spirit, of the isolation that came with command. "I have fought for so long," he said softly, his thumb drawing slow circles across the back of her hand, "that I forgot what peace felt like. Then I woke in your cabin, and you were there, your copper hair, your fierce eyes, and for the first time in years I felt still." Mara Elling's throat tightened. "I understand that," she said quietly. "Since Cole Elling died, I've kept moving, always working, always busy, because if I stopped, if I allowed myself stillness, the grief would consume me." She looked up at Rauch, at the face that had become familiar with startling speed, and felt the truth settle deep inside her. "Now I think," she continued, "maybe stillness isn't something to fear. Maybe it's something to claim." Rauch's free hand lifted to her face, his touch reverent. "Mara," he breathed, her name sounding like a vow. "I came to your mountain seeking nothing but death's embrace. You pulled me back. You showed me there is more to life than war and blood. Rauch!" He rested his forehead against hers, and she felt her eyes close, felt herself lean into his warmth. "Let me speak," he murmured. "Among my people, when a woman saves a warrior's life, a bond is formed. But this, what I feel when I look at you, this is more than duty, more than honor. This is terrifying." "Yes," Mara whispered. His quiet laugh brushed her lips. "Terrifying, and wonderful, and impossible. We barely know each other," she said, though even to her ears the protest sounded weak. "I know your strength, your courage, your kindness. What more do I need?" Mara's hands rose to his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath her palms. "There is the war between our peoples," she said, "and my grief, and the impossibility of any future." "The future comes whether we invite it or not," Rauch interrupted gently. "The war will rage until it ends. Your grief is yours to carry as long as you must. But this moment, this belongs to us, and I am tired of denying what my heart knows." "And what does your heart tell you?" He answered by closing the space between them, capturing her mouth in a kiss that stole her breath and weakened her knees. It was not timid or careful. It was urgent, fierce, filled with the longing built over days locked in snow and silence. Mara gasped against him, her fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer as warmth surged through her. This was nothing like kissing Cole. Cole had been gentle, measured. This was raw and consuming, a force like wildfire, like floodwaters tearing through restraint. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, Rauk rested his forehead against hers once more. "My heart tells me," he said roughly, "that I have waited my entire life to be seen as more than a weapon, that you chose mercy when you found me dying in the snow, that you make stillness feel like home." Tears stung Mara's eyes. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of loving again. Afraid of loss." "Then we will be afraid together," he said, cradling her face as if she were something priceless. "But we will not let fear steal this moment, not when winter has given us time." She knew she should resist, knew all the reasons this was dangerous, impossible. But as his arms closed around her, as the storm howled outside and firelight flickered within, something unfurled inside her, like green shoots breaking through snow. She felt alive, truly alive. And for the first time since Cole's death, she felt the possibility of joy. They came together that night by the fire, slowly, reverently, learning one another with care and wonder. Rauk's strength was tempered by gentleness, his gaze never leaving hers, as if nothing else existed. Later, wrapped in blankets and each other, he traced shapes along her shoulder, the same geometric designs he had carved into the axe handle. "What do they mean?" Mara asked drowsily. "They are symbols of protection," he murmured into her hair, "for strength, for safety, for a long life." "You carved them for me." "Yes, because I cannot imagine a world where you are not safe." He kissed her temple. "You have become necessary to me, Mara Elling, like air, like water, like the rising sun." She turned in his arms, studying his face in the fire's glow. "When the snow melts, when it melts," Rauk said firmly, "we will face what comes, together, if you will have me." It should have been madness, but as Mara looked into the eyes of the Apache chief who had entered her life on winter's darkest night, the rightness of it settled into her bones. "Yes," she whispered. "I will." His smile broke like sunrise. "When the thaw reaches the high ridges," Rauk said quietly, "we will build a life that defies every rule they try to bind us with. Both worlds may reject us for it." "Let them," Mara replied. Rauk's arms tightened around her. "We will shape a third world, ours." Outside, the storm finally loosened its grip. The wind's howl softened into a hush. Inside the small cabin, wrapped in firelight and each other, two people who should have been enemies found something stronger than peace. They found home. The snow began to retreat 3 weeks after Rauk first opened his eyes in Mara Elling's cabin. At first it was subtle, a slow drip from the eaves, a thin patch of earth emerging. But soon the land sang with movement, water rushing, ice breaking apart, winter surrendering inch by inch. Mara stood in the doorway watching the change. Rauk came up behind her, his arms settling around her waist, his chin resting against her shoulder. The ease of the gesture still startled her. How quickly intimacy had taken root, how natural it felt to share space and breath. "The mountain passes will clear within days," Rauk murmured near her ear. "My people will be wondering what became of me." Mara's stomach tightened. She had known this moment was coming, had felt it gathering like thunder beyond the horizon. Knowing, however, was not the same as facing it. "What will you tell them?" she asked. "The truth," he said, holding her closer. "That I was caught in the blizzard, that a brave woman saved my life, and that I am returning, but not alone." She turned within his embrace, searching his face. "Rauk, are you certain? Bringing a white woman into your camp could bring resentment, anger." "There will be questions," he admitted. "But I am war chief. My word carries weight. When they see what I see, your strength, your courage, your heart, they will understand. And if they do not—" His jaw hardened. "They will learn." "You are mine now, Mara," he said firmly. "Under my protection." Warmth spread through her despite the fear. "Yours," she repeated softly, tasting the word. It should have stung. It should have reminded her of men who once tried to trade her life away like property. But coming from Rauk, it meant something else. Partnership, safety, belonging. "And I am yours," he said, reading her thoughts. "This bond goes both ways. In my culture, marriage is a union of equals. A woman chooses as much as she is chosen. And you, Mara Elling, have claimed my heart as surely as I have claimed yours." Marriage. The word hovered between them, heavy, frightening, exhilarating. Mara had stood before vows once, had pledged herself to Cole Elling with hope and certainty. This felt different, larger, like standing at the edge of a vast unknown and choosing to leap. "I don't know your customs," she said quietly. "Your language, your ways. What if I fail?" Rauk silenced her with a slow, grounding kiss. When he drew back, his eyes burned with certainty. "You will learn. My people will teach you, with patience and respect, because you saved their chief, because you are brave enough to walk between worlds, because you choose me when easier paths exist." "There are no easy paths," Mara said with a shaky smile. "Only difficult ones pointing different ways. Then we walk the hard road together," he replied, placing her hand over his heart. "Feel this. It beats for you. This is real, more real than borders, wars, or laws made by men who never learned to see past fear." She felt it, the steady rhythm beneath her palm, and felt her own heart answer. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow. I must return first to ensure all is well. Then there are ceremonies, rituals to make our union known. We must speak with the elders, offer gifts. It will take time." "How long?" "A week, perhaps 2. "And during that time," he added gently, "you will stay in my dwelling, under my protection. No one will harm you." Mara nodded, imagining what lay ahead, leaving the cabin, the last place she shared with Cole, stepping into unfamiliar territory, trusting a future built with a man she had known for mere weeks, yet who felt as essential as breath. "I'm terrified," she admitted. Rauk smiled softly. "So am I. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward anyway." They spent the day preparing. Using Mara's small supply of cloth, Rauk fashioned clothing better suited to his people's ways. A simple dress, adorned with beads from his own garments. His hands were steady and practiced as he worked. "You're full of surprises," Mara said. "Among my people," he replied, "men learn many skills. Sewing, cooking, caring for children. These are not women's tasks, they are human tasks. Very different from white society," she mused. "Then white society weakens itself with pride," Rauk said simply. That evening, they sat together by the fire one final time, quiet beneath the weight of what awaited them. "Tell me about your people," Mara said softly. "I want to understand." So Rauk spoke, of seasons and movement, of clan and kinship, of sacred balance. He spoke of his mother, who raised him alone, of his sister Thea, married into another band, of the children who followed him through camp, hungry for stories. "You love them," Mara said. "They are my responsibility," he answered. "Every choice I make is for them, for their future. And now I'm part of that future," she said. Rauk turned her toward him, his expression grave. "You must understand something, Mara. My life will never be safe. There will be danger, raids, times I must leave to protect our people. Can you accept that? Mara thought of loss, of fear, of love worth risking everything for. She lifted her chin. Yes. She thought of the long months she had endured after Cole Elling's death, the crushing silence, the constant edge of fear, the way loneliness gnawed at her day and night. Then she thought of what Rauk was offering her, a life shaped by purpose, bound by community, and lit by a love that burned even when darkness pressed in. I didn't survive this winter on my own just to lose my nerve now, Mara Elling said with quiet resolve. Yes, I can accept it, because the alternative, living without you, is something I cannot bear. Rauk answered her with a kiss. They left at first light. Mara carried a small pack holding her few precious belongings, Cole's books, her mother's locket, the wedding ring she still could not bring herself to abandon. Rauk had built a travois from branches and leather, loading it with supplies. He moved through the mountains with effortless certainty, every step guided by deep familiarity. Mara followed, her heart racing with a mix of fear and exhilaration. The journey lasted most of the day, winding through retreating snow and early signs of spring. Along the way, Rauk pointed out landmarks, teaching her the hidden paths and signals of the land. He showed her which plants could be eaten, where water ran beneath the thaw, how to read the tracks left by animals. Mara absorbed every lesson, recognizing the truth of it. This was preparation. He was teaching her not just how to survive, but how to belong. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, they crested a ridge. Mara stopped short, her breath catching in her chest. Below them, settled in a broad valley where the snow had already withdrawn, lay the Apache camp. Dozens of dome-shaped dwellings stood in loose clusters. Smoke rose from cooking fires. People moved through the space in the practiced rhythm of shared life. Home, Rauk said softly, longing threaded through the word. They had barely begun their descent when a shout rang out. Figures rushed toward them, women, children, warriors. Mara's grip tightened around Rauk's hand, fear surging, but he squeezed back firmly. They celebrate my return, he murmured. Stand tall, show no fear. You are with me, and that means you are safe. The crowd gathered around them, voices rising in a language Mara could not understand. Faces flickered past her, some welcoming, some cautious, others openly wary. Yet Rauk's presence commanded space. People stepped aside for him, though their eyes kept returning to Mara with undisguised curiosity. An older woman pushed forward, her face lined by years, her gaze sharp and assessing. She spoke rapidly to Rauk, her tone clearly scolding, her gestures animated. He answered calmly, then gestured toward Mara. The woman studied her with an intensity that made Mara straighten unconsciously. Then, to her surprise, the woman smiled, warmth softening her features. She said something gently in Apache and reached out to touch Mara's cheek. Rauk translated. My mother says you carry the mark of one who has known sorrow. She welcomes you among our people and thanks you for bringing her son home. Mara's throat tightened. Tell her I am honored to be here. When Rauk translated, his mother nodded in approval. She spoke again, longer this time, and Rauk's expression turned both pleased and faintly embarrassed. What did she say? Mara asked. She says I chose well, he replied, that you have strong eyes and a brave heart, and that she looks forward to teaching you everything I am too foolish to know. His mouth twitched. She's not subtle, Mara said, laughing despite her nerves. The sound seemed to ease the tension around them. A few people smiled. A child darted forward, brushing Mara's red hair with gentle curiosity before fleeing back to his mother. Rauk's mother, Iska, took charge immediately. With firm gestures, she ushered the crowd aside, then looped her arm through Mara's with surprising strength, clearly claiming her as her responsibility. Rauk walked close beside them as they moved through the camp, Iska speaking animatedly in Apache while pointing out various places along the way. They stopped before a dwelling larger than the rest. Iska gestured for them to enter. Mara ducked through the low doorway into a space that felt unexpectedly warm and ordered. Woven mats covered the floor. Supplies were neatly arranged along the walls. A fire pit sat at the center, smoke drifting upward through an opening that let the late-day light spill inside. "This is my home," Rauk said quietly. "And now, it is yours as well." Mara looked around, trying to imagine herself living here, belonging here. It was nothing like her mountain cabin, nor the Boston townhouse of her youth. Yet as Iska bustled about preparing tea and Rauk stood close with a steady hand at her back, something settled in Mara's chest. Not belonging yet, but the beginning of it. In the days that followed, Mara was introduced to the intricate rhythms of Apache life. Iska took her firmly under her wing, determined and tireless. Despite the language barrier, they communicated through gestures, expressions, and shared work, each day weaving Mara more tightly into the fabric of the camp. Through patient demonstrations and steady guidance from Iska, Mara Elling slowly learned the Apache way of daily survival. She learned how to prepare meals over open fire, how to tan hides until they were soft and strong, how to make the flat bread that sustained the camp. She learned which plants eased fever, which soothed wounds, how meat was dried and stored for long journeys, how baskets were woven from willow with practiced hands. The work was exhausting. Her fingers blistered, her muscles ached in ways she had never known. Yet beneath the pain was an unexpected satisfaction. She was learning. She was changing. She was becoming part of something larger than herself. Not everyone welcomed her. Some warriors watched her with open suspicion, others with barely concealed hostility. She heard the phrase "white eyes" more than once, felt the sharp weight of judgment pressing against her back. But Rauk's presence was a shield. When he was near, no one dared show her open disrespect. Among his people, Rauk was undeniable, commanding without cruelty, decisive without arrogance. He listened more than he spoke. Mara watched him settle disputes, organize hunts, sit in council with the elders. Each day, her respect for him deepened. This was a man shaped by war who had not let war strip him of compassion. At night, they lay together in his dwelling. Rauk taught her words from his language, first the simple ones, water, fire, food, sky, then the heavier words, love, home, forever. In return, Mara read aloud from the books she had carried from her former life, sharing poetry by firelight. "Your language is strange," Rauk remarked one evening, his head resting in her lap as her fingers combed through his hair. "So many words for the same meaning, so much complexity." "Yours is beautiful," Mara replied. "Every word feels deliberate, nothing wasted." He smiled faintly. "White men speak many words and say little. Apache speak few words and make them matter." "Is that why you're quiet sometimes?" she asked. His eyes closed, his body fully at ease. "I am quiet because I am learning the language of peace instead of war. You make me want to choose words that build, not destroy." Mara bent and kissed his forehead. "You already do." A week after her arrival, the elders called a formal council. Rauk explained they would discuss the marriage ceremony and ensure all traditions were honored. Mara dressed carefully in the clothing Iska had helped her make, a long tunic and leggings adorned with intricate beadwork, her hair braided in Apache style. The council was formidable. Weathered faces formed a wide circle, men and women alike, studying her with expressions that ranged from open curiosity to deep skepticism. Rauk stood beside her, steady and unmoving, and Mara drew strength from his presence. The eldest among them, a woman named Thaya, spoke first. Rauk translated softly at Mara's side. She asks why you wish to join our people, what you seek here that your own world could not give you. Mara inhaled slowly, then spoke with clarity. I seek freedom, the freedom to choose my own path and make my own decisions. In my world, women are traded, controlled, silenced. Rauk showed me another way. Partnership instead of ownership, respect instead of dominance. I wish to join your people because I believe in those values. She paused, then continued, her voice steady. He saved my soul as surely as I saved his life, Rauk translated. Mara watched the elders' faces, some doubtful, others thoughtful. Thea revealed nothing. Another elder spoke, a scarred man with sharp eyes. Rauk translated again. Kor asks what you will do when your people come with guns and soldiers, when they demand you return or threaten war. Will you stand with us? The question struck deep, but Mara answered without hesitation. I already chose. I chose when I pulled Rauk from the snow. I chose when I left my cabin. I choose every morning when I wake beside him. My people abandoned me long before I left them. She gestured to the camp, to the faces around her, to Rauk. This is my people now. Rauk's hand closed around hers as he translated. Several elders nodded. The questioning continued for nearly an hour, testing her resolve, her skills, her understanding of what she was choosing. Mara answered honestly, without embellishment. At last, Thea raised her hand for silence and spoke at length. When she finished, Rauk's shoulders eased. The council accepts you, he said, emotion thick in his voice. They believe you come seeking a true home. The marriage ceremony will be held at the next full moon, 3 days from now. Until then, the women will instruct you fully in our ways. Tears burned in Mara's eyes. Thank you. I will honor your trust. The following days passed in a blur. The women of the tribe surrounded her with relentless energy, teaching rituals, symbols, responsibilities. They laughed at her mistakes, corrected her patiently, shared stories. Iska watched with visible pride. The most important guidance came from Seyarin, a woman married to one of Rauk's warriors who spoke some English. You must understand, Seyarin told her as they prepared herbs. Marrying a war chief is not easy. He belongs to the people. Duty will pull him away. Decisions will weigh heavily on him. Can you endure that? Mara thought of Cole Elling, of quiet days and gentle routines. This life would be louder, harsher, but fuller. I can endure anything, Mara said firmly, as long as I am not alone. Seyarin smiled. Then you will do well here. You will never be alone again, though sometimes you may wish you were. The night before the ceremony, Iska led Mara to the sweat lodge. Elder women waited inside. Through gestures and translation, they explained it was a purification rite, a crossing from one life into another. The heat was overwhelming. Sweat poured from Mara's skin, her head spinning as chants filled the space, voices rising and falling like breath itself. Through the rolling heat and the rhythmic chants, something inside Mara Elling loosened and shifted. The darkness pressed close, thick and alive, and memories rose unbidden. Her mother gone these 10 years. Cole Elling, lowered into frozen earth, her uncle's iron grip and the life he tried to force upon her. The frightened, defiant girl she had been in Boston, desperate to escape. That girl no longer existed. In her place stood a woman who had endured winter alone, who had pulled a dying warrior back from death, who had chosen love over terror. A woman preparing to bind her life to a man and to a people her old world had taught her to fear. She felt no regret, only a fierce, shining certainty that this path was right. When they stepped out of the sweat lodge, the full moon hung high, bathing the land in silver. Iska took Mara's hand and squeezed it gently, speaking in Apache. Mara did not understand every word, but she caught the one that mattered most. Daughter, tears slid down Mara's face, mingling with the cooling sweat on her skin, and she squeezed back, wordless. The ceremony began at dawn. Mara stood before the gathered tribe, wearing a gown of soft white buckskin, adorned with hundreds of tiny beads sewn by Iska and the other women. Her hair fell loose down her back, as tradition required, with a single eagle feather woven through it, a gift from Rauk, symbolizing freedom and strength. He stood across from her in ceremonial dress, bare-chested, his skin marked with symbols she had learned meant protection and abundance. His gaze never left hers, dark and steady, filled with a love so unmistakable it stole her breath. Thea, the eldest, conducted the ceremony, her voice carrying an Apache across the circle. Seyarin stood beside Mara, whispering translations. She speaks of marriage as partnership, not possession, Seyarin murmured. Of how love is a choice renewed each day, not a chain that binds. Thea beckoned Rauk forward. He spoke then, his voice firm and resonant. Mara did not understand every word, but she heard her name and the words for love, for forever, for home. Seyarin translated softly. He says you are his heart made visible, that you came to him through snow and storm and changed his life, that he pledges his strength to your safety, his wisdom to your counsel, his love to your keeping, that he will honor your freedom even as he claims your heart, that you are his equal, his chosen partner. Tears streamed freely down Mara's cheeks. When Thea motioned for her to speak, Mara drew a trembling breath. Seyarin translated as she spoke. I came to these mountains seeking freedom, and found only loneliness. I believed strength meant standing alone. Rauk taught me otherwise. He showed me that true strength is choosing to stand beside someone, even when the world forbids it. He taught me that love is not a cage. It is a home. She lifted her chin. I give my heart to him, my strength to our partnership, my life to building something worthy in this land. I choose him. I choose this. I choose us. Thea nodded and produced 2 cords, one white and one brown. She bound their hands together, speaking words Seyarin said joined 2 lives, 2 peoples, 2 destinies. You are one, Thea declared. The camp erupted in celebration. The feast that followed was dizzying. Food passed from hand to hand, drums and song, laughter rising into the morning air. People approached to offer blessings, to touch Mara's hands, to welcome her as one of their own. Children darted between the dancers, and elders shared stories while warriors demonstrated skill. Through it all, Rauk remained close, his hand finding hers again and again. As evening fell and the fires burned low, he leaned close. Are you happy? He asked quietly. Mara looked at him. This man who had entered her life frozen and dying, who had become her lover, her partner, her husband. She thought of all she had left behind, and all that awaited her. Yes, she said simply. I am. His smile was bright as sunrise. Then I have everything I need. They slipped away from the celebration to their dwelling, where quiet awaited. Soft furs and woven blankets had been laid for them. As Rauk gently freed her from her ceremonial dress, as his hands moved with reverence and care, Mara felt a completeness she had never known. This was home. Not the cabin in the mountains, not the Boston townhouse of her youth. This place, his arms, his people, this wild and living land, this was where she belonged. "I love you," she whispered against his skin. "I am Noxony," he murmured in return. "I love you," in the language that was now hers as well. Spring eased into summer, and Mara Elling, now known among the people as the woman who walked between worlds, found her footing in Apache life with an ease that surprised her. The language came slowly but surely, her mouth learning new sounds, her ear catching rhythms and meaning. Customs settled into habit. How respect was shown, how decisions were shared, how each person carried a piece of the tribe's survival. What astonished her most was not the learning, but the belonging. Early suspicion faded as Mara proved herself willing, eager to work, to learn, to give. She tanned hides until her shoulders burned, gathered healing plants under the watchful eye of the tribe's healer, and learned to ride the small, tough ponies the Apache favored. Rauk watched her transformation with pride, and with something deeper, a quiet contentment she had never seen in him before. He remained war chief, still bearing the weight of leadership, but a gentleness had entered him. In the privacy of their dwelling, he was simply her husband, the man who held her through the night and murmured poetry against her skin in 2 languages. The world beyond their camp, however, did not soften so easily. As summer deepened, tension with nearby settlers tightened like a drawn bowstring. Rauk spent long hours in council, weighing how to defend their land without inviting all-out war. When invited, Mara attended, learning the hard politics of survival where cultures collided and violence waited close at hand. One evening, Rauk returned from scouting with trouble written across his face. Mara was preparing the evening meal, cornmeal cakes he favored, and the moment she saw him, concern rose sharp in her chest. "What happened?" He sank beside the fire, exhaustion etched into every line. "Soldiers are building a new fort 50 miles south. They claim it's for protection. We know better." She set the food aside and moved behind him, her hands finding the knots in his shoulders, working the tension free. "What will you do?" "What I always do," he said quietly. "Try to keep our people safe without giving up who we are." He leaned back into her touch with a long breath. "Sometimes I wonder if any path remains." "They push farther every year," she said firmly, her hands steady. "They take more. They break treaties as soon as the ink dries. Then we adapt," Mara continued. "We survive in ways they don't expect. We outthink them instead of only outfighting them." Rauk turned, surprise and admiration lighting his eyes. "You speak like a chief." "I'm married to one," she said with a brief smile, then sobered. "But I mean it. You're the greatest warrior I know. Maybe strength alone isn't enough anymore. Maybe it's time to be clever." In the weeks that followed, they planned together. Mara's knowledge of white society, paired with Rauk's mastery of the land and his people's needs, shaped strategies that baffled military commanders. The camp moved often, always a step ahead of patrols. Quiet networks carried warnings before danger arrived. It wasn't perfect. There were skirmishes, close calls, but the feared, large-scale violence never came. Soldiers grew frustrated. Settlers grew confused. And among the Apache, whispers spread that their war chief had found a weapon stronger than force. He had found wisdom. Mara's place in the tribe deepened beyond anything she'd imagined. Women sought her counsel when dealing with whites. Young people asked her to teach them English, understanding the power of knowing an enemy's words. She became a living bridge, protecting her people where she could, fostering understanding when it served survival. The greatest change came in autumn, when Mara realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for weeks, but She hadn't been completely certain until Iska, whose knowledge in such matters ran deep, confirmed it with a knowing smile and a rush of excited Apache words that Mara's growing fluency allowed her to mostly follow. That evening, when Rauk returned from a hunting run, Mara met him at the edge of camp. One look at her face shifted him from weary to alert in an instant. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing's wrong." She took his hands and guided them to her still flat belly. "Everything is right, astonishingly, wonderfully right." Understanding came slowly. When it struck, his expression changed completely. The hardened war chief vanished, replaced by a man stunned with awe. He dropped to his knees there in plain sight of half the camp, resting his forehead against her stomach, his hands trembling at her hips. "A child," he breathed. "We are going to have a child." "Yes." Mara's fingers slid into his hair, her own eyes shining. "Yes, we are." The news swept the camp like fire in dry grass. The celebration that followed rivaled their wedding feast. Iska wept openly, pulling Mara close and murmuring rapid blessings. The women surrounded her with advice and stories, already planning for the birth. Even the most doubtful warriors offered congratulations, seeing in Mara's pregnancy a promise of the tribe's future. That night, alone in their dwelling, Rauk held her with a tenderness that made her chest ache. His hand rested protectively over her womb, his gaze distant with thoughts she couldn't quite read. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. "I'm thinking about the world we're bringing this child into," he admitted. "A world at war, a child of Apache and white, belonging fully to neither." "They'll belong to both," Mara said gently. "And that will be their strength. They'll understand what neither side can on its own. They'll be the bridge we've been trying to build." Rauk met her eyes in the firelight. "You're not afraid?" "Terrified," she said honestly, "but hopeful too, because this child, our child, stands for something new. Love that crosses lines, a future neither world expected." He kissed her then, slow and reverent. "You make me believe in that future," he murmured. "You make me believe in peace." The months passed easily. Mara continued her work within the tribe, though the women refused to let her overdo it. Iska stayed close, sharing the wisdom of her own pregnancies and teaching the herbs and practices that eased birth and guarded the baby's health. When winter returned, Mara faced it surrounded by community, wrapped in Rauk's arms, comforted by the steady knowledge of new life growing within her. The contrast to the winter before, alone, grieving, barely surviving, sometimes left her lightheaded. "Do you ever regret it?" Rauk asked one snowy night as they lay tangled beneath thick furs. "Leaving your old life?" Mara thought carefully. She remembered Boston's comforts, the cabin where she had loved Cole, all the paths she never took. When she spoke, the answer came without effort. "Never. Not once." She turned toward him, her hand covering his where it rested on her swollen belly. "This life, with you, with our child, with your people, it's more than I ever imagined. It's hard, yes, sometimes frightening, but it's real. It's mine in a way my old life never was." "Even when warriors watch you with doubt," he said, "even when the language still trips you, even when storms trap us for days." "Especially then," Mara replied firmly, "because those struggles mean something. They're not just about surviving. They're about building, becoming someone I'm proud to be." Rauk drew her close, burying his face in her hair. "I don't know what I did to deserve you walking into my life. You nearly froze to death outside my cabin. she said with a soft laugh. Not heroic, but effective. His hands spread over her belly, feeling their child move beneath his palms. Very, very effective. The baby arrived with the spring thaw, born in the traditional Apache way. Mara Elling labored in a special dwelling, surrounded by Iska and the other seasoned mothers of the tribe. Their voices steadied her through every contraction, their hands bracing her as she worked to bring new life into the world. Rauk paced outside, bound by tradition to remain away until the birth was complete. Even through the haze of pain, Mara could sense him, could picture him wearing a restless path into the earth, his worry heavy in the air. The labor was long and brutal, hours of relentless pain that left Mara trembling with exhaustion. Then Iska placed a squalling infant into her arms. When Mara looked down at that tiny face, dark hair already thick, skin neither fully white nor fully Apache but beautifully in between, every ounce of suffering dissolved beneath a wave of fierce, overwhelming love. "Your son," Iska announced, her face glowing with pride. "Strong and healthy. He has his father's eyes and his mother's fire." Someone ran to fetch Rauk. Moments later, he burst through the doorway, tradition forgotten in his need to see his family. He stopped short at the sight of Mara cradling their child, his expression softening into something so tender it drew smiles from every woman in the room. "Come meet your son," Mara whispered, her voice thick with tears. Rauk approached as if stepping onto sacred ground. When he finally took the baby into his large, calloused hands, when the infant's tiny fingers curled around one of his, the fearsome war chief broke down and wept openly, without shame. "He's perfect," Rauk breathed. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Solin, meaning friend to all, because he embodied the hope of peace between worlds. Rauk added a second name in English, Cole, honoring the man whose death had set Mara on the path that led her here. It felt right, honoring the past while welcoming the future. The tribe welcomed Solin with ceremony and gifts. Elders offered blessings, spiritual leaders spoke prayers of protection, and the child was celebrated as a living promise of continuity and hope. Even those who had once doubted Mara's place among them softened at the sight of the infant who carried both peoples in his blood. As spring turned to summer, and Solin grew from a fragile newborn into an alert, curious baby, Mara and Rauk settled into the rhythms of parenthood. Nights were exhausting, broken sleep, feedings, endless questions about why a child who slept peacefully all day chose the deep hours of night to demand attention. But the days were luminous. Mara watched Rauk transform into a devoted father, carrying Solin everywhere in a cradleboard, speaking to him constantly in both Apache and English, singing low songs that made their son's eyes widen in wonder. He was gentle and endlessly patient, the same man who ruled with strength, now pouring that strength into protection and care. Iska remained a constant presence, teaching Mara the traditional ways of tending infants and sharing wisdom carried through generations. The other women formed a living circle of support, ensuring Mara was never alone in the challenges of new motherhood. One evening, when Solin was 6 months old and beginning to babble in sounds that belonged to no single language, Mara sat outside their dwelling, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson. Rauk joined her, Solin in his arms, settling beside her with the ease of long habit. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noting her quiet expression. "I'm thinking about how much has changed," Mara said softly. 2 years ago, I was alone in a cabin, certain I'd never feel whole again. She looked at them, her husband, her child, her people. And now look at us, a family, a community, a life I never could have imagined. Rauk shifted Solin to one arm, and drew Mara close with the other, holding her as the sun slipped below the mountains. "Do you remember that first night?" Rauk murmured, his voice low. "When you told me you hadn't come west to belong to anyone?" "I remember thinking you might kill me," Mara Elling admitted with a soft laugh. "I remember thinking you were the bravest woman I had ever known," he replied, brushing a kiss to her temple, "and that I would do anything, to keep that fire in your eyes alive." "You succeeded," Mara said quietly. She leaned into him, watching Solon clutch his father's finger with fierce determination. "This life isn't what I planned," she added. "It's better." As summer deepened, the tribe's relationship with nearby settlers began to shift. Word spread about Rauk's white wife and their son, who belonged to both worlds. Some settlers remained openly hostile, but others, seeing proof that coexistence was possible, began to approach with caution. Small trades followed, careful conversations, the fragile beginnings of understanding. Mara increasingly found herself acting as translator and mediator. To settlers, her presence softened fear. To the tribe, her loyalty was beyond question. Her happiness among the people challenged long-held assumptions on both sides. It was delicate work, demanding patience and restraint, but inch by inch, progress was made. Violence did not disappear. There were still deaths, still grief, still nights filled with mourning. Yet there were moments of light as well. A settler woman seeking Iska's help during a difficult birth. An Apache hunter sharing knowledge with a struggling homesteader. Small acts that hinted a different future might exist. Rauk watched it all with guarded hope. After years of war, hope felt dangerous. But with Mara beside him and Solon in his arms, he allowed himself to believe that perhaps his son would grow up in a world where his worth mattered more than the color of his skin. One autumn night, when the land burned gold and crimson beneath the stars, Mara woke to find Rauk standing at the doorway, Solon asleep against his chest, his gaze fixed on the dark horizon. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. "I was thinking about my father," Rauk said. "He died when I was young. I used to wonder what kind of man I would become, and what he would think of my choices." Mara joined him, resting her head against his arm. "I think he would be proud," she said gently. Rauk looked down at their son. "Not for the battles I've fought," he said, "but for this, for choosing to build instead of only destroy, for choosing love over hate." "It wasn't just you," Mara said. "You changed me too." He drew her close. "Then together, we will change the world for him." "That's a heavy task," she said with a faint smile. "Good," Rauk replied, nodding toward the sleeping camp. "We are not meant to carry it alone." The years that followed were never easy. Peace wavered, threats returned. But through it all, Mara and Rauk stood together, raising Solon, and later his younger sister Saya, in a home shaped by 2 languages and shared strength. They taught their children to honor both heritages, to see power in their mixed blood, rather than shame. Mara never forgot her old life. She kept Cole Elling's books. She still dreamed sometimes of Boston's narrow streets, but she always woke to Rauk's arms and the sound of her children's laughter. And she knew, deep in her bones, that this was where she belonged. She had come to the mountains seeking freedom and found something greater: purpose, family, and a love strong enough to survive any winter. On quiet nights, when the camp slept and the stars watched over them, Mara and Rauk sat together in silence. "Are you happy?" he would ask, as he had on their wedding day. And her answer never changed. "Yes," she would say. "Always yes." By choosing, day after day, to build a life from small, stubborn acts of courage, by loving with everything she had, without bargaining or retreat, Mara Elling once dragged an Apache warrior out of the snow, never imagining he would one day claim her heart. But the truth ran deeper, quieter, and far more beautiful than that. They did not rescue one another once. They saved each other again and again, from isolation, from despair, from lives lived only halfway, hidden in the long shadow of fear. Together, Mara and Rauk shaped something entirely new. A family that stood with one foot in each world, a bond that ignored every rule meant to keep them apart. A love neither of their peoples had believed possible. In the end, it was enough. It was everything. And dear listener, if there is one thing that lingers most from Mara and Rauk's story, it is not the romance, or even the victory. It is something far simpler, far truer. They found each other when both were already broken. Rauk was dying in the snow. Mara was alive in body but frozen inside, surviving rather than living. Neither was whole. Neither was healed. Neither was ready by the standards the world likes to demand. And still they chose one another. That is what matters. Mara recognized Rauk's cold because she carried her own long winter within her chest. Rauk saw Mara's loneliness because it mirrored his own. Love did not grow from perfection. It grew from honesty. Two people brave enough to stop pretending they were fine. And perhaps that is why this story reaches you now. Maybe you are listening late at night, when the house is too still and your thoughts grow louder than you'd like. Maybe you feel like that man in the snow, unseen, overlooked, waiting for proof that you still matter. Or maybe you are like Mara once was, moving through the days, doing what must be done, while your heart remains numb from a loneliness so deep you barely remember what warmth feels like. Here is the truth no one tells you. You do not need to be fixed to deserve connection. Our world teaches a cruel lie that we must be healed before we are lovable, complete before we are worthy. But look at Mara and Rauk. They found each other not despite their brokenness, but because of it. So if tonight you are tired of being strong, that is allowed. If you are worn down from smiling when all you want to do is fall apart, that is human. If you wonder whether there is still a place for you in a world that seems to have moved on without you, hear this clearly. There is. You are not the weight you carry. You are not the mistakes behind you. You are not the years you believe you lost. You are the quiet spark that refuses to die. The same spark that made Mara pull a stranger through the snow when turning away would have been easier. The same spark that made Rauk open his eyes and choose life one more time. That spark is enough. It always has been. Today, you may not have saved an Apache warrior from a blizzard, but maybe you fed a bird outside your window. Maybe you offered a smile to a stranger. Maybe you simply took one breath and chose to keep going when every part of you wanted to stop. That is courage. That is heroism. That is worthy of a story. The greatest tales are not about perfect people doing impossible things. They are about ordinary people, often wounded, choosing kindness when bitterness would be easier, choosing connection when solitude would feel safer. Tonight, remember this. You are doing better than you think. Those days you survived, the days when even rising from bed felt like a mountain. You conquered them. You are still here, still feeling, still moved by a story about two people who found warmth in the heart of winter. That means your heart still works, still beats, still knows how to love. It doesn't matter how many winters you've endured. It doesn't matter how often life has left you standing in its bitter, cutting cold. What matters is this. You are still here. And as long as you're here, as long as that stubborn ember inside you refuses to go out, there is hope. Not the polished kind from storybooks or easy promises, but the honest kind. The kind that says tomorrow might be just a little warmer than today. The kind that whispers that next week you might find one small reason, just one, to smile without forcing it. That warmth doesn't have to arrive all at once. It doesn't have to come soon, and it doesn't have to look the way you expect. Maybe it's a person. Maybe it's a calling. Maybe it's a stray cat that chooses your porch. Maybe it's the way sunlight slips through your window on a quiet Tuesday morning. It doesn't have to be grand. It only has to be real. So rest now, dear listener. Rest without the weight of needing to be strong tomorrow. Rest without the pressure to be healed, fixed, or ready for anything at all. Sleep knowing that you are enough. Right now, just as you are, in this exact moment. Your story isn't finished. It's still unfolding. And sometimes the most beautiful chapters begin in the most unlikely places. When you're freezing in the snow, when you're alone in the cabin, when you're convinced there's nothing left to hold on to. That's often where something quietly extraordinary appears. Good night. Take a slow, steady breath. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment, and thank you for writing with us today. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully, only to support production, while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories.